Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our next virtual event with Damien Echols and Seane Corn, here to discuss Damien's latest book, Angels and Archangels, A Magician's Guide. We are so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this uncertain time and even expand virtually across the world, so thank you so much, especially for joining us right now. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, which you can learn about on our website at booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is tomorrow, same time, with Chuck Klosterman to discuss his new book, Raised in Captivity, Fictional Nonfiction, and you can register the same exact way if you're interested. And for regular updates on upcoming events, you can also subscribe to our email newsletter, which you can also do on our website. So tonight's event will end with a Q&A, and to submit a question, you can use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And if you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, you can vote them up. I think you guys have already been doing that, so you'll probably see a few there already. And there are many, many of us. There's 400 people here tonight, which is really exciting. So we probably won't get to all the questions, but we will answer as many as possible. And also, please consider supporting our bookstore and our authors tonight by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book, which you can do by clicking on the green button below. And I will also share a link to Sean's book as well. And with that said, sorry, I got stuck as I was thinking about our audiobooks. I was looking for your audiobooks earlier, but I didn't see them. So I would normally share those, but we also do have books through Libro FM if you're interested. And with that said, let me introduce our guest speakers for this evening. Damien Echols is the author of the New York Times bestseller Life After Death and co-author of Yours for Eternity with his wife, Lori Davis. In 2018, he published High Magic, A Guide to the Spiritual Practices That Saved My Life on Death Row with Sounds True, and his latest book, Angels and Archangels, A Magician's Guide, was recently published with Sounds True as well. The story of his wrongful murder conviction has been on the subject of several films, the HBO documentary trilogy Paradise Lost, and West of Memphis, a documentary produced by Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. He and Lori live in Harlem, and for more, you can visit damienechols.com. Seane Corn is an internationally acclaimed yoga teacher and public speaker known for her social activism, impassioned style of teaching, and raw, honest, and inspired self-expression. Over her 25-year teaching career, Seane has created many instructional DVDs, including her groundbreaking series, The Yoga of Awakening with Sounds True. Featured on over 40 magazine covers and countless media outlets, Seane has chosen to use her platform to bring awareness to the global issues including social justice, sex trafficking, HIV/AIDS awareness, generational poverty, and animal rights. In 2005, she was named National Yoga Ambassador for Youth AIDS, and in 2013 received both the Global Green International Environment Leadership Award and the Humanitarian Award by the Smithsonian Institute. Since 2007, she's been training leaders of activism through her co-founded organization, Off the Mat, Into the World. Seane also co-founded the Global Siva Challenge, which has raised over $3.5 million by activating communities of yoga and wellness in fund and awareness-raising efforts. Her first book, Revolution of the Soul, which Damien was just holding up, was published in fall of 2019. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Damien and Seane. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. Thank you both for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Sam, so much. And thank you, everyone who has come out tonight. This is huge. Damien, holy shit. This is incredible. I want to take a moment. I'm just celebrating you in such a huge, huge way right now, just because of it's these two books that touch my own heart and soul in such a big way, because I've bared witness to this trajectory over the last many years. And I want to take a moment just to share with folks really our connection and how we met, and which will lead into these books and their purpose in the world. So, Damien, like everyone else, I followed your story back in the 90s and was outraged by the injustice. Your story, of course, really touched me in a big way. As someone who is a social justice activist, I could not understand how this injustice was being perpetuated and continued for so many years. When your final, the last documentary was released, West of Memphis, I remember I was somewhere in the world teaching, and in my break time, I do what I do, which is watch documentaries. And I was watching this one. You had just recently been released, and I was at the part in the documentary where you weren't released. You were still incarcerated, and you said a line that literally made me stop in my tracks. And I rewound it, listened to it again, rewound it, listened to it again, and I thought to myself, I think I need to know this man. And what you said was, and I'm paraphrasing because I haven't watched this documentary in a really long time, but it's when I knew, you knew that you dropped in a big way. You said, talking of Lori, you had said jokingly that the reason all of this was happening, meaning your incarceration, being on death row, was somehow your responsibility, your doing. And you shared how when you were a child, you always knew that you were a magician, and that all the magicians that were well known in the world, that somehow your presence in magic was going to transcend all of that work. And then the next line you said that being incarcerated gave you 20 years to practice magic and meditation, and essentially turned your prison cell into a monastery. And I was like, what did he just say? You weren't blaming, you weren't raging, you weren't like just fighting at the system. You seemed in that moment at peace in the recognition that this was a part of your journey, and an essential part of your journey that was going to, whether you lived or not, didn't seem to be the issue. It was a part of your own personal evolution. And it's what made me reach out to you. So before I continue, I want to hear you just talk a little bit about that. Like, how did you turn your prison cell into a monastery? And did you mean it? Did you feel that somehow that was your doing?
I think, yeah. I mean, you know, it sounds kind of crazy to say this, but, and don't get me wrong, there were times when it was absolutely horrifying being in that situation. You know, when I endured a lot of horrific brutality, but even before I got out, I started to see the situation that I was in as more of a blessing than a curse. You know, I started to see it as, people think that this is, you know, so hard to articulate, but people think that I had like a horrible life. But when I see other people's lives, I think I would rather have what I had than have to do things like, you know, go to college or, you know, work a job that I hated, you know, that I dreaded getting up and having to go to every morning. You know, the things that people sort of settle into because they don't realize there is anything more that they could be doing. To me, that was like the ultimate horror. Even growing up, you know, I would look around me. I grew up in a world of absolute just poverty and illiteracy. And I would look around me and I would think, there has got to be something else. There, somewhere, somehow, there has got to be something other than this desolation that I see around me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to get to it. I didn't even know the first step to take. So it was almost like, since I couldn't do anything to get myself out of that situation, the universe plucked me out of it and put me somewhere where I would be forced to start doing this work. And really, one of the things that forced me to start doing it was whenever I got to prison, I looked around me and I saw these people that the second they walk in the door, most of them stop growing. They stop changing. You know, they focus on, like you said, either what was being done to them or someday in the future, whenever they have this hope that they may get out. And you know, that in itself kind of destroys you. One of the things I think that was the most beneficial to me that I got out of prison was learning how to let go of hope, like to stop living for the future. I think it's only whenever you stop living for the future that it enables you to completely and absolutely experience the present moment. And that's what that did. It's what it forced me to do. You know, by the time I got out, I was doing magic for up to 8 hours a day. And honest to God, it was getting to a point where I didn't even think about the prison anymore. You know, not only magic, it was like a combination of magic and the world that Lori and I had sort of created that gave me something to see and focus on and experience other than the horror that was taking place in the physical world around me. And I've said this a lot of times in a bunch of different interviews, but one thing that really hit me hard was I read this interview one time where they were talking about Timothy Leary, the guy that did all the LSD experiments. And at one point he got put in a federal prison, and Ram Dass goes to visit him, and he tells him, we've come up with this plan to break you out of here. And Timothy Leary says, no, you can't do that. I've got too much work to do. By the time I walked out of prison, that's kind of how I had started to feel. Like, you know, I was so focused on what I was experiencing through the practice of magic and so excited about it, and just like kind of enraptured by the changes that I was experiencing in my own consciousness and psyche and emotional life and everything else, that I kind of stopped thinking about even getting out anymore.
Now, you were only 18 years old when you went in. So your experience of magic prior to that was probably pretty unsophisticated.
Yes.
Magic.
Yes.
And I would also think that you're 18 years old, you're completely abandoned by your family, your community, society, the system that we're supposed to count on has now betrayed you, and they're putting you to death. I would imagine you're pretty bummed out, disillusioned.
Yes.
And yet somehow you made the decision to sit down, to take a breath, and to begin to learn magic. What was the first resource that was given to you that you committed yourself to?
You know, it's kind of a combination of things. I think really for me, it kind of started with Zen in a lot of ways. When I first got to prison, I met this guy that immediately, as soon as I walked in the door, he gives me an envelope, like a manila envelope that had like stamped envelopes and an ink pen and paper and a bar of soap. And he says, I do this for everybody that comes in. And the only thing that I ask you to do in return is you do this when somebody else comes in the door. You help the next person that comes in. So this guy, whenever they get ready to execute him, the only person that's allowed to be with you whenever you're executed is your spiritual advisor. You know, no family, no friends, nothing like that. So this guy, whenever he was finally executed, by the time they killed him, he had become a Rinzai Zen priest. He had a Zen master that would come back and forth from Japan to teach him. Whenever they executed him, they allowed his teacher to come back on death row and sort of tell us, you know, what his last words had been, how he had held up through the execution, what his last meal had been, all that sort of stuff. We just started talking and you know, exchanged addresses and started writing back and forth, so that he eventually became my teacher too. And I didn't realize what was happening at the time because it was so subtle. You know, when we're talking about like these spiritual experiences, we expect them to be like, you know, fireworks and just this huge thing that there's no doubt that something's happening to you. And yes, that it is that way sometimes. You know, when you get further into more in-depth practices, it's absolutely like that. It's like a bomb going off in your psyche at points. But in the beginning, it was so subtle. I thought, I'm not getting anything out of this. Even after years of sitting Zen, I started to feel like maybe all of this is just placebo. Maybe all of this is just belief. You know, maybe people feel like they're getting something out of this because they want something out of it so bad. You know, maybe meditation and Zen and all of this is really no different from, you know, when I was a kid and you come in contact constantly with like hardcore fundamentalist Christianity, where people believe, you know, one day I'm going to die and I'm going to go to heaven and live in the clouds or whatever it is. I started to feel like maybe that's what all of this is. Maybe there's nothing to any sort of spirituality whatsoever. I didn't, you know, when I'm looking back in hindsight, I realize it was doing something, it was changing me, but it was so subtle that at the time I didn't know it. And I guess what it was doing was it had started to train me to take my attention off of the world around me and sort of bring it back to myself, bring it back to an internal focus. But to me, that wasn't what I was looking for. You know, I'd read all these books about Kensho and Satori and, you know, all these experiences that people would have. And I would think that's what I want. And this little stuff that I was experiencing, it wasn't it. So I decided, okay, there's probably nothing to any form of spirituality whatsoever beyond what you believe. So I'm kind of wasting my time with all of it. So I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit doing anything and just live here, just in this world. This is all there is. But before I do that, I'm going to go back to my first love, which was ceremonial magic. But this time, you know, I had approached magic in the past almost the way people approach, you know, like a deathbed religion, where the only time you really do anything spiritual is when you're in trouble, when you really need some help or when something's going wrong. That's the way I had looked at magic before. And I think a lot of people still do. You know, they look at it as like manifesting something that you don't have or something in that vein. But I decided this time I am going to approach magic with the same level of dedication and discipline and commitment that I had been bringing to the Zen practice. So I decided, you know, every single day I'm going to get up and I'm going to do these rituals, whether I feel like it or not, whether I experience anything or not, just to give it one last shot before I say all spirituality is horseshit. So I started doing these practices, and it started with the two main practices that beginners learn in ceremonial magic, which is the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, and the middle pillar. So I started doing these, and within probably 3 months, I didn't even realize there were going to be like side effects to this. You know, they tell you in magic, one of the things you have to kind of get out of yourself is the lust for results. Like, don't look at what you're going to get from this. Just try to the best of your ability to focus on the ritual itself, on the present moment and doing it. So I started doing that. And I can remember one day when I realized I was probably about 3 months in by that point, maybe a little less. But I can remember I was only allowed to see one person a week, one visitor a week for 3 hours. Other than that, I was in solitary confinement. Wasn't, you know, no real human contact or anything. And so Lori was coming to see me one day, and I was getting dressed to go down to the visitation room. And I sat on the edge of my bed, and I reached over to put my shoes on. And it was like something just exploded in my psyche. I realized for the very first time in my life, I'm in the present moment. I'm not thinking about the future. I'm not thinking about the past. I am doing absolutely nothing but reaching down to put my shoe on. You know, and the second you realize that, it's gone, it's over, because you're back to conceptual thinking. But for me, as crazy as that sounds, that was a miracle. It allowed me to experience firsthand that there's something to this. This is doing something to the way my consciousness is functioning in the world. So it showed me that this is not all about belief or you know, faith or hope or anything else. It's like if you do certain things, you get certain results. And I would, years down the road, I would even meet someone who told me at one point, he said, this is one of the reasons, like real, like traditional, deep-rooted magic lodges that have these initiatic lineages that go back, you know, through distant parts of history. He said, this is why they have always been so incredibly careful about who they teach these things to, is because it really does work whether you are a psychopath or a saint. You know, it is a spiritual science. If you do certain things, you get certain results. It doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. But that was one of the things, when I finally experienced that something is happening to me as a direct result of this, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire, and it just made me ravenous for more. I wanted to see what else is out there. What else can I do? What else is there to learn?
Well, now I'm going to shift again and go back to kind of our journey to get to the next part of this and the manifestation of this book. So I hear what you say in the documentary. I'm very well aware in that moment that you're doing some deep spiritual work. And I make the decision right then and there. I look you up online. You were very easy to track down at that time. And this is so out of character for me. I don't do stuff like this, but I reach out to you and let you know that I just saw your documentary. I tell you that I'm a yoga teacher, and that if you or Lori ever need yoga at any time ever, I wanted you to know that my classes would always be open to you no matter where they were in the world. You wrote me back like 15 minutes later. And you said, I'm living in Salem. I'm practicing Reiki. If you ever come out to Salem, I would love to give you a session. And cut to 3 weeks later, I'm in my car driving from Jersey up to see you. And the whole time I'm thinking, what the fuck? How is this happening? How am I driving to meet this man I do not know, that I reached out to on the internet, for God's sakes? And I remember when you and I met, we started to talk. And I, of course, was sharing, we were talking about yoga, and we were talking about spirituality, and we were talking about magic. Because at this point, I know that you practice magic. And in the past, I had practiced magic, and I bring my entire yoga practice and teaching is ritual. And we're having this conversation. And anytime you and I started to talk about magic, your whole body language started to change. You would fidget, you wouldn't make eye contact, you almost were looking over your shoulder. And it's in that moment I thought to myself, oh my God, he's in trauma. This man is in trauma having this conversation with me. And it dawned on me so fast that this very thing that it was clear that you were passionate about was the very thing that got you on death row. And I remember thinking, how do I tell him that magic and spiritual practice is deeply in the mainstream? It's happening. I would love you to talk a little bit about your trauma around your practice and how that changed and evolved.
Well, it was, when I got out, I didn't talk about magic for a long time. I would use words like, energy work or meditation or Reiki or, just very generic, like things that people aren't going to take offense at for me, it was like, I looked at it as this is what the world tried to use to murder me. I had no idea that we would ever reach a day in society where people would be so open to this sort of stuff. Especially that I would be writing books about it or doing talks about it or anything else. To me, it was just something that I had almost died for and didn't, it was almost like it stunted me in a way. It really, really fucked me up in a lot of ways. I would be paranoid about even, having a book about magic if people saw you reading anything about that. But it was nothing else for me filled that void. Even whatever it is, any kind of energy work or meditation or anything else, it's like it didn't scratch an itch the way that magic did. It was like when I was doing magic, when I was reading about magic, when I was practicing magic, when I was talking about it, that feels to me like this is what I am supposed to be doing. And everything else was missing the mark by a little bit. But it was talking to you, honest to God, I tell people now, and this is absolutely 100% true. Neither of these books, High Magic or Angels and Archangels, neither of these books would exist if we had not had that conversation. They would not. And I can't remember exactly the way you worded it, but basically what you told me was, if you let them take this from you, if you live your life having give this up, then it's like they killed you already. You may as well have not even gotten out if you give up what you love, what you're supposed to be doing out of fear. And I realized that's absolutely true. It's like, what the hell am I living for if I'm not doing what I know my purpose is? And it was like something broke in me. And from that point on, I didn't care if they, crucified me verbally or you know, whatever they were going to do, or if people laughed at it because they said it's, you know, there's no such thing, whatever it was, I didn't care what the outside world thought from that moment on. I just knew that's right. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I have to start doing this. And it's, you know, I read this interview one time with Arnold Schwarzenegger where he was talking about how he knew, like when he was younger in Austria, he said he knew he was supposed to be doing something, but he didn't know what it was, and he didn't know how to get started. And the only thing he could think to do was lift weights. He said, if I can at least, you know, keep pushing myself physically to develop physically, that's the only tool I have available to me. So I'm just going to do this because it's all I can do. And everything else fell into place. You know, he eventually ends up moving to America and becoming this huge movie star, and then going on to be the governor of California and marrying a Kennedy and all this kind of stuff. It was the same way with me with magic. It was like once I got past that hurdle and devoted myself entirely to it, everything else in life started to gradually fall into place. And it was magic that started really the healing process of coming through all the post-traumatic stress disorder and everything else that I had whenever I came out of prison. It was, I would not have been able to leave that behind if it wasn't for magic.
Yeah, I remember the moment. I remember when you were sharing with me, and I knew I was in the presence of a very intimate conversation that I had a feeling you hadn't spoken that way to a lot of people besides Lori, your wife. And I remember thinking in my head, I knew that the words that I used were going to be really important. And I had a feeling in that moment, like when I was driving there, that thought, like, what the fuck am I doing? I remember thinking, I know why I'm supposed to be here right now. And because it was clear to me, if this man can get past the trauma of this, the impact that he can have on the collective can be extraordinary, because there's no one that I know in modern society who had the opportunity to dedicate 20 years of their life to this work tirelessly. And I thought, like, oh God, please give me the words. Now I didn't know if you would get past the trauma, and I would understand if you couldn't. It would make even more sense to me that the trauma was going to keep you frozen in this lifetime, and no way were you going to be able to share this work. But I remember thinking, like, just encourage and let him know, like, the world has moved on, and they want and need this, and need your voice, a progressive voice, an open voice. And I remember then watching you slowly begin to share your work, and the pride I felt internally, seeing you step in front of crowds of people and using your voice, literally resonating the words of angels and incantations and rituals, and everyone is being held by your clarity, your expertise, your humility, and your deep, deep love. And so, thus why, when you let me know that you were writing this book, and it was in the process. Now, when you were writing both books, you would text me in the morning, little like, and this was before I knew they were part of the book. And it was really funny. I would wake up in the morning and you would send me these long texts. And at first I thought they were like, you were having dreams of me or like getting guidance, and you were giving me this information. And I read it literally like, oh, this is about me personally, that you're like saying, hey, Seane, pay attention to this angel, pay attention to this, until I realized you were actually writing your book and texting me this content, which I threatened you that I was going to put it all together and publish it for you. And when I saw High Magic out like this, knowing the years that it took for you to titrate your nervous system, to get confident in your commitment to be in your purpose, and to be so fearless to put it in paper like this, to share with the world, was one of the most proud moments in my life, truly, because I knew personally what it has taken for you to share this, knowing the trauma that you experienced. And then, what, a year later, a year and a half, you prolific motherfucker, you pop out this book. And this book is so incredible and so brilliant and beautiful. And again, what I love is that you're making these practices, rituals that are often so coveted and precious, accessible. You can read this, you can do this. If you're a beginner, if you're an advanced practitioner, I feel like you are pulling the veil back to this sacred content and offering it to the world in such a way that's digestible. So would you talk a little bit about what it was like for you to actually put these rituals and your words onto paper and publish them to the world?
What you just said is kind of exactly what I wanted to do. You know, a lot of the stuff has been it's been really closely guarded secrets that was only passed down if you belong to certain like initiatic traditions. And I always thought that was kind of just messed up, honestly. You know, and if you look back through history, there are so many like spiritual traditions and teachers that the reason they were doing what they were doing was to make this stuff available to the mainstream. You know, and I don't necessarily think that magic is ever going to be as prevalent as something like, you know, the Baptist church in the South or anything like that. But I think it is very, very important that it be put out there so that anybody who wants to can take a crack at it. You know, I mean, when you're talking about things like, I always tell people how, for example, when you're talking about the Old Testament, you're talking about a book that was written by kings, about kings, for kings. It was not a book that was ever meant to be digested by the masses. The only way you were going to ever have access to like the codes that allowed you to even understand the information that was sort of embedded in these stories is if you were born into, you know, an aristocratic family, or, you know, somebody that was really wealthy and connected to that. That's one of the reasons they used to call magic the royal science. You know, up until very, very recently, most people couldn't even read. You know, only now are we entering a time in history when so many people are literate. Up until then, you know, recently, that was not the case at all. Well, when you get to the New Testament, kind of what Jesus is doing is trying to make this available to everyone. You know, not just kings, not just rich people, not just royalty, not just people who are initiated into these traditions, but everyone. And even, you know, when you're looking back in recent history to people like Aleister Crowley, he was doing the exact same thing. You know, he said magic was supposed to be for the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, meaning anyone. This should be thrown out there, and even if only a few people are ever going to pick it up and try it, they should at least have the opportunity to be able to do that. And for me, once I saw the potential in these practices and what it does to you, how it can change your life, it made me want to kind of do the same thing, to get this out there where even if, you know, the tons and tons of people don't ever pick it up, even if it's just one person that this makes a difference in their life, then that's what my job is. It's not my job to be attached to what people do with the teachings or how far people take them, how far they advance, or how widely accepted they ever become. My job is just to put this out there to the best of my ability and not be attached to it. Let it take on its own life, do what it's going to do, let it find who it's supposed to find, and let whoever's supposed to find it, and just focus on doing my work, which is writing these books or doing talks or classes or whatever it is. And as long as I do that, as long as I stick to that and don't get attached to the outcome, then it's like everything else in my life sort of falls into place, and I am incredibly happy. You know, once again, it's back to that thing about getting rid of the lust for results. Just do what I'm supposed to be doing and take joy in the fact that I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and everything else will take care of itself.
It's amazing. I mean, Damien, I have you know, I could ask you 17,000 questions. I want to like keep unpacking this even more. Your depth of knowledge is so nuanced, and I get so personally charged up and excited when I hear you speaking. I have a couple more questions for you, and then I want to make time for people who are listening right now, because I can see that they've put a bunch of questions into the little box, and I want to honor that. But couple questions. One, will you be writing another book on magic?
We're already working on it. Lori and I are actually doing one together this time. And what, you know, this one, Angels and Archangels, I started off like in high magic with the basic practices that people are given. People, like when you first start receiving things in magic lineages, they refer to you as a neophyte. Mm-hmm. And you're given basic rituals that you're supposed to master, like steps in a process. So that's what I wanted to start with high magic, was the basic rituals that you're given as a neophyte, and then move into things that are slightly more complicated, a little bit harder, you know, a little more memorization in Angels and Archangels. But Lori and I are working on one now that's tentatively called Rituals, and it'll be put out by Sounds True. But what I wanted to do is kind of what we're both doing is taking a step backwards and putting together a book of rituals that anyone, regardless of where they are at in their development, practice, understanding, whatever, can use to make concrete, definite changes in their life. So we're already working on that.
Amazing. Yes. What I want to say to people who are listening who might not know Lori, besides being your wife, we pale in comparison to Lori's brilliance as a spiritual leader, as far as I am concerned. That woman resonates on such a high level and often likes to stay on the down low a little bit. But I'm just saying, I'm just outing her right here and now that Lori is the one. She is the force to be reckoned with. And she pulls down some serious energy. So I look forward to that book. And I remember you and I talking, and you were thinking about doing some kind of an online school.
Yes.
Is that still happening?
Still working on that. You know, computers are not my specialty at all. I still don't even own one. I'll probably have to break down and start learning how to use one soon, but we are already in the process. I don't know exactly how it's going to come about. But that is one of the things that I want to be able to do, is have like a community where I can connect people who really want to learn with other people who can help them to learn, you know, because I can't do all of it myself. You know, I can't be like the face of magic. So I want to be able to, you know, get enough people who know what they're doing and can help me get this out there to people who want this information, because it's kind of crazy how many people I hear from now on like a regular daily basis who want to learn this, or just have tons of questions. So it's like, it seems like every day kind of the desire for it is kind of growing out there in the world. And that's what I want to do. You know, once again, that's what I feel like my life's purpose is getting information to people about exactly what magic is and how to do it for those who do want to do it.
I mean, you were truly spared for a reason. Thankfully, the justice system in this circumstance worked well enough to provide you freedom. But the fact that you took that freedom and chose to step fully into your power and purpose and serve this world is just a testament that magic truly does work. You're a breathing, living, embodied example of what magic can do and is. And it thrills me, the idea that you would create a community to inspire other practitioners to explore what magic is, to be a part of life alchemy. Speaking of alchemy, move your head a little bit. There's a whole situation right now that is just blowing my mind. And at another time, I want to know every little thing that's happening in there.
I did an interview with somebody recently, and they said something like, "Yeah, we should meet up and smoke weed. I see you've got a bong behind you. You must really like weed." I was, no, that's not a bong. That's an alchemy kit.
It is, isn't it? That looks amazing. All right, so again, so much in this conversation that we could really unpack. But what makes me so excited, Damien, is that just some years ago, your narrative was directly a part of being the West Memphis Three and your story of incarceration and death row. And I love that now when people are thinking of you, that there's a different narrative that is being a part of your experience. You're an author, you're a magician, you're a spiritualist, you're a thought leader in the community. And that incarceration was an aspect of your experience, but it doesn't define who you are.
Right. Exactly.
And I think for everyone listening, that's something that they should hold within their own heart, that we all go through these journeys, and sometimes they're positive and sometimes they just pull the rug right out from underneath us. But for all of us, they can inform the direction of our life. You chose not to die while in prison. You chose to evolve regardless of the end result. And that should be all of us, whether we're on death row or not, that we're always trying to do the work, forgiving, letting go, grieving, feeling, and opening our hearts to all that we learn. So thank you for that. So I'm going to pop into the questions right now. All right. Is it better to perform the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, MP, multiple times a day, or to spend more time doing it once? Like your weightlifting example, more reps or more weight, better for training?
You know, I honestly, I think it could go either way. Maybe try it. One thing I always tell people is there are no hard and fast rules. Like, you may get something out of one of the practices that are taught in magic that I don't get anything out of, and I may get something out of something that you don't get anything out of. I always tell people, experiment with it a little bit. You know, try both ways. Try it doing it multiple times a day, or try it just putting more time and more effort into one time. I've actually done it both ways and experienced really profound results both ways. You know, for me, for example, when I was in prison and, you know, I didn't have to go to work, I didn't have any sort of outside world to think about or worry about at all. I had the entire day to do magic. So I would do it several times a day. You know, I would set up a routine where I would do it sometimes 6 or 7 times a day. Whereas out here, you know, most people have families or jobs or commitments, things that they have to dedicate time to. So do the best you can do within those parameters. If you can only do it one time a day, then do it one time a day, but put as much, you know, effort into doing the visualizations and the breath work and everything else as you possibly can do, not just, you know, rush through it to get done. But once again, just try it both ways. See which works best for you.
All right, that sounds like good advice. Let me go to the next question. Damien, thank you so much for all you've done and continue to do. You are loved by so many. In your videos, I hear you speak on the roles that Judaism, Christianity, and the characters themselves from the Old and New Testament play in the Kabbalah magic. Can you speak on what role, if any, that Islam and the Prophet Muhammad play in the Kabbalah magic esotericism?
That's kind of a hard question to answer, just because it involves going into like aspects of magic that aren't necessarily like beginner level things, like the higher levels of magic. You know, when you're talking about magical training and development, there's sort of 3 stages that people go through in what they call the first order. That's where you're given all of the basic rituals and practices and information to memorize, and you work at doing these things until you have them down like reflex, until it becomes, you know, second nature. You can do them inside out, forward and backwards without thinking twice. Once you're through that, once you can do that, you move into the second order. In the second order, you take everything you learned in the first order and start applying it towards higher goals, higher aims. whether that be, you know, manifestation or like the peak, the epitome of what you're striving for in the second order is what they call attaining the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Once you do that, it sparks incredibly profound levels of growth and development and unfolding and expansion of consciousness. But when you do that, what happens is it almost automatically triggers the crossing, the initiation into the third order. In the third order, and keep in mind, this is not something that most people will do. Even most people that start to practice magic, they say something like maybe only 2% of the people who even come to practice magic will make it that far. But in the third order, one of the things that happens is you receive a word that is the embodiment of everything that you are to teach. It's like everything that you're here for in one single word. So like, for example, Lao Tzu, his word would have been Tao, or Moses, his word would have been YHVH, you know, the unpronounceable word of God. Whenever you'll have these certain teachers that come along throughout the history of the world, there are very, very few of them. You know, it's estimated that maybe at most there have been 12 of them, that they will receive a word which completely turns the understanding of the world on its head. So for the age of Pisces, which is what we're moving out of now, we're moving from Pisces into Aquarius, Jesus or Christ was the peak of that. His word would have been agape, would have been love, you know, like love for your fellow man. Other people who receive a word in that same period of time, in that same eon, and Muhammad would have been of that same eon that Christ was, will receive a word that will not like initiate a new eon because we're in the same time period. It will be more of like a furthering or a reinforcing of the word of the embodiment of the eon. So Islam is almost like a continuation of the work that Jesus started, if that makes any sense. You know, that's why Muhammad went further into things like saying there are to be no images made of me or of God or of anything else. What they were doing was moving us further and further into a time when we approach divinity, not with these conceptual labels that we've applied, you know, like God is a man, like it's this bearded man sitting on a cloud in the sky. Or it's going all the way back to the age of polytheism. You know, God is not, or the source that everything came from is not all of these different gods and goddesses. What all of these teachings are doing is gradually moving us towards a time when we approach and understand and interact with that source of creation in a purer form, a more undiluted, less defined form, if that makes any sense. We're actually going into a time in history now. We're moving out of the age of Aquarius or the age of Pisces and into Aquarius. I try to explain that what magic is the root, the seed, the kernel that all the Abrahamic religions came from. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all of them come from this ancient Sumerian tradition of magic that is based on the stars. You know, and a lot of it, and I realize this is a long-winded answer, so bear with me. But what it is, when I say that all of this is based on the stars, all religion, all magic, basically all of our understanding of the world through science or whatever it is, came from mankind starting to watch and observe the heavens, the stars and their movements. So, you know, one thing that we know now is as we go through the course of the year, the sun passes through the 12 constellations of the zodiac. It takes about a month to go through each one. So in the course of a year, it moves through all 12 constellations of the zodiac. That's a cycle that's happening. Well, there's also an even bigger cycle that's happening beyond that one, which is what we call the procession of the equinoxes. What the procession of the equinoxes is, and this is why all these ancient cultures paid so much attention to the spring equinox, is because they realized, and keep in mind, you would have had to watch the stars for 2,000 years to realize that this was happening. But if you stand facing east at the time of the spring equinox, for 2,150 years, you will see the sun rise in the same constellation. So during like ancient Sumerian times, when polytheism was the main way that humanity understood and interacted with divinity, if you would have stood facing east at the time of the spring equinox, you would have seen the sun rise in the sign of Taurus for 2,150 years. If you skip ahead a little over 2,000 years after that, when Judaism is becoming the predominant spreading religion through the world, if you would have stood facing east at the time of the spring equinox, you would have seen the sun rise in the sign of Aries for 2,150 years. Aries is symbolized by the ram. This is why you have all of this symbolism in Judaism, like the Jewish priests play the ram's horn, or when Abraham's getting ready to sacrifice Isaac, God sends him a ram to sacrifice in his place. Skip ahead from that 2,150 years, and I'm coming to a close. Face east at the time of the spring equinox, and you would have seen the sun rise for 2,150 years in the sign of Pisces, the sign of two fish. This is why fish are so predominant in Christian religion. You know, like when Jesus feeds the multitude, he feeds them with two fish, or he calls his disciples fishers of men. You have all of this fish symbolism. He tells his disciples at one point, I'm getting ready to leave you. They say, well, what do we do when you leave us? He says, follow the man with the water pitcher into his house. Well, men did not carry water pitchers in those days. That was considered entirely women's work. But a bearded man holding a water pitcher on his shoulder is the symbol for Aquarius. So what he's telling people is we're going to move from the sign of Pisces into the sign of Aquarius, which is where we're going to now. All of these other religions and traditions, whether it's Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, they were all just sort of like vehicles to carry this same information that began at the dawn of human civilization in ancient Mesopotamia. They're transporting that information in different guises up into modern times.
And Damien, first of all, you never have to apologize for being long-winded. I have no doubt in my mind that everyone listening right now would have more than happy to just lean back to their cup of tea and listen to the rest of the night. I'm talking about astrology and magic and history. So please, like, don't ever think for 1 second that that content is not invaluable and rich and captivating. Other people agree with me. Yes,
I always just feel like people's eyes are going to start glazing over, and they're going to be like, "What the hell is this guy talking about?"
Well, but Damien, I feel like when it comes to magic, since it is so historical, it lives within our bodies. It's something that affects all of us on like an ancestral level. So I feel that when you speak to these mysteries, there's a part of our being that cocks our head and thinks, why do I know this? That it speaks to a familiarity. And so I don't think if someone's eyes are glazing over, I think it might just be because they're getting their minds blown or their nervous system is trying to make sense of this recognition. That's why, because it's like my body, it's like, oh, talking. I know this, but I don't know it. But my body remembers. All right, I'm going to go to another question that I have seen. Let's see here. Yeah. Damien, first, I want to thank you for your spirit and the effort you put into this world. You are beautiful and blessed. Yes, you are. My question pertains to the sigils and talismans you use for the angels and archangels, specifically the symbols encircling the sigils. Can you speak a little on those and their system? And are they of your own design? Lastly, I'd like to hear what you have to say on creating a personal alphabet or language for magical use. Thank you again.
That you'll see throughout both high magic and angels and archangels, you'll find talismans all through those, and there's all kinds for all different reasons. Like the one on the cover of high magic that's sort of embossed in the cover was the one that I had created for overcoming obstacles. It's under the cover. I see you looking confused. It's under the dust jacket. But what these things are, they are, yes, there it is. They are ways of you know, our subconscious or unconscious mind does not speak in language. It speaks in images. You know, this is why we have dreams, because it is the deeper parts of our psyche trying to convey things to us in the only way that it can, through imagery. So one of the things that people figured out in magic pretty early on is that you can use images to kind of bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to the subconscious, like fire energy directly into the subconscious mind, to, you know, bring about really incredible, all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can do pretty much anything with these. One of my favorite stories was about Austin Osman Spare, who is a magician that his specialty was creating talismans. And he at one point created one to, and I don't know why in the hell he would do this, but he created one to make his house seem haunted, and then stuck it somewhere, forgot that he even made it, and then couldn't figure out why he was hearing all these weird noises in the night. What it does is you create a symbol, and there's many, many different ways to do this. The method that I use for the most part uses, in the Golden Dawn tradition of magic, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, they had what they called the Rose Cross. The Rose Cross, it's there's a picture of a rose, and on each petal of this rose is a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So what you would do to create a sigil or a talisman is put a piece of paper over this rose and draw lines connecting each letter. You would break whatever it was that you were trying to manifest down into one single word. Like, for example, happiness or prosperity or protection, whatever it is. Whatever it is you're wanting, you break it down into one word that describes what you're trying to create. And then you spell that one word on the rose. You know, you would go, like, say, for protection, from P to R to O to T. Well, whenever you get through the whole word, you've got basically what looks like a squiggly line. One of the things that makes this so valuable is because you'll hear a lot of people, whenever they come to magic, they'll say, I can't visualize. You know, you're talking about visualizing something, accomplishing something, and I have my visualization skills are just not that great. I can't picture this. Well, when you're using talismans, you don't have to visualize it. All you have to do is do the energy work that you would have done on a visualization on this talisman. So, for example, you could do something like the middle pillar, or an invoking of the, you know, a pentagram invoking ritual, or a hexagram invoking ritual, whatever your preferred method of drawing in chi, drawing in energy, drawing in as much of it as you possibly can, and then pushing it into the symbol. And you can do a bunch of different things with it. You can carry it on you, you know, put it in your wallet or your purse or whatever, if you're, you know, create one for prosperity, or you can burn it, light it on fire and let it burn down to ash. The main thing is just that you are looking at it and allowing it to sink into your unconscious or subconscious mind after you've put energy into it. Most people who try them get addicted to them just because they work so incredibly well and they're so easy to make. The thing about the alphabet, I have created my own, but I also use some that were already created by other people. So, for example, one I use is called Theban, Theban. The reason you want to use an alphabet like that is you want to use something that you don't use in your normal daily life, something that you are not familiar with. The reason for that is because if you're not familiar with it, you have to concentrate on it whenever you're writing it out. You know, when you write your name, for example, in your own native tongue, you put no thought into it. You just, and that's it. But if you're using a language that you don't know, don't understand, and you have to look and like transliterate, you know, each letter, you are putting a ton of concentration and attention on what you're doing. And it's like that saying that they have about where attention goes, energy flows. When you have to concentrate on this, that's where you're directing your attention and your energy.
That's beautiful. All right. I love the sigil that I have that you made. Hangs over my in my office, like right over the back of my head, and I love the energy that's there, and it just reminds me to stay in purpose. It reminds me of transformation. It reminds me just to see the bigger picture to why I'm doing what I'm doing, and so that's kind of like pride suggestions on my wall over there. Okay, let me see. I've got another question for you. Oh, this one's a good one. Tie in your magic practice with your yoga practice. I just got certified as a yoga teacher this past Saturday, Amanda Simmons. Congratulations on that. So, Damien, what's the connection, the intersection between magic and yoga? Is there one?
There is. One of the things that you're doing whenever you first start to do magic, you know, Rudolf Steiner was a guy who started off training with H.P. Blavatsky, the Russian mystic who gave birth to Theosophy, brought it into the world. Rudolf Steiner started off training under her, but then went off on his own. His work is, both of their work is really, really interesting. But one of the things he said was that, you know, the way we have eyes and ears and a sense of, you know, touch and all of these things to experience the physical world around us, we have sort of these same faculties on the energetic level of reality that allows us to perceive these more subtle realms of existence, these more subtle levels of reality. The thing is, most people never, they haven't done anything to exercise those faculties. They've never brought them online. So they're kind of atrophied, shriveled up, not being used. So that most people are not able to detect anything going on these more subtle levels of reality. Like, you know, when we're working with energy, like whatever you want to call it, chi or prana or whatever it is. Most people, you know, you have to do something for a while to be able to start feeling that and sensing that. And I think yoga is one of the things that does that to people. You know, that's why one of the first things you're taught in magic is breathing exercises. Something about focusing on your breathing triggers people to eventually realize that there's something going on other than just air coming in and out of me. There's also like a subtle energy. You gradually become aware of it. And that's sort of the same thing you're working with when you're doing yoga. You know, like when I used to watch yoga classes or read yoga magazines or hear people talk about it, you know, when they're doing these poses, you know, whatever it is, downward dog or whatever, and I would hear these people say things like, you know, breathe into the backs of your thighs. And I would think, what the fuck does that mean? How do you breathe into your leg? Well, if you keep trying, you will eventually feel, when you're concentrating on that part of your body and trying to direct the flow of your breath to that part of your body, you eventually become aware that there is something going on here other than just breathing oxygen. So I think both yoga and magic can be, well, you know, that's what they call magic, is the yoga of the West. Mm-hmm. You are training yourself to be able to perceive and work with these subtle energies.
I mean, I've always saw a strong connection and define magic. I've heard is often shifting energy at will. And when I wrote my book, you gave me a quote very similar to that. And that's the alchemy of yoga. When you move and you breathe and you're moving from contraction to expansion, you're changing the lead of your fear into the gold of your wisdom through these activations. And sun is a ritual in and of itself that connects us to something higher, both within ourselves and beyond. And so I've always seen the alchemical effect of yoga on the physical body, and that if you do it long enough, it's transformative on an emotional and also a spiritual level. So to me, I love that question. Who asked it, and good luck on your teaching experience going forward. This is another question I think is kind of interesting because it's very relevant to your experience. But any advice for using magic to heal from severe childhood trauma?
You know, a lot of whenever you're doing magic, even if you don't focus on a specific result, even if you're just going through the rituals, you know, like, for example, whenever you are doing yoga, a lot of times you're not focusing on a result. You're just doing the practice of yoga. The same with magic. If you just take on a consistent daily practice, what I found from just my own experience is that the trauma starts to heal in and of itself. You know, I always tell people it's the same way. A lot of people get interested in magic because they want to be able to change the reality they're experiencing in some way. You know, something about reality is is not pleasant to them. Either it's because they're in a state of financial need, or they're lonely, or whatever it is. They're wanting to manifest something in their life, some sort of change. What I found is whenever you start doing magic, even if you're just doing it to be doing the practices, what happens is you yourself almost become a living talisman. You're filling yourself with this divine energy over and over and over, consistently throughout the day. You know, that's kind of one of the metaphor of in alchemy, when you're doing these practices where you're heating something consistently. You know, part of the reason you're doing it, you don't want the temperature to fluctuate. You know, you don't want it to get too high and then have to turn it down too low. You want an even, consistent temperature. What that symbolizes is your practice. You know, you don't put everything you've got into it one day a month and then slack off for the next 29 days. You want this even, consistent practice, because what happens whenever you're doing that is gradually you find that the rest of your life starts to even out and fall into place. And there will be fewer and fewer things that you do have to do any sort of magic to manifest. But for trauma, yes, there are all sorts of things, you know, specific things that you can do to address those issues, you know, whether it be invocations of specific angels that have to do with healing on the level of whatever the trauma is, whether it's psychological trauma or emotional trauma, whatever it is. There are specific, you know, angels, archangels, energies that correspond to the tree of life that can be invoked to heal those. But there's also really, you know, one of the things I was talking about recently in another talk that I did was how, you know, when we think of manifesting something or changing something, we always think of it as being in the future. You know, we're manifesting something down the road. We don't realize that the future is no more real than the past is. You can manifest something in the past just as easily as you can manifest something in the future. Both are just these like points in the time stream that truly don't even exist. The only thing that exists is here and now. So I've actually, you know, come across practices and experienced practices where you focus on the point where you experienced the trauma and focus on sending yourself at the time of the trauma energy so that it has a healing effect that you experience in the present moment. But really, just start doing a practice. As long as you start doing something, I always tell people, if you take one step towards the universe will take 10 towards you. All you have to do is make some sort of effort, and you will start to experience change of some kind.
There are a couple of things in your book that I thought I love the way that you explained. One is related to angels as energy and archangels in relationship to the individual angel as almost in service to. But, and I can never pronounce this word, but very often when we think of angels, we anthropomorphize. Thank you. And give these human qualities that include feelings of right, wrong, good, or bad, project onto angels what's limited in our own consciousness, our own five sense reality. And obviously, angels expand that. And yet, because of our Christian backgrounds, we're indoctrinated by this idea of these angels kind of floating around. And we really address this quite well around angels as energy, and that each of these archangels serve to pull down, if you will, different aspects that can support us. It's like the juncture between us and that transcendent state of awareness. There's this pathway where the archangel lives. And what you also said, I'd love you to expand on that, but you also said something about the idea of why we say for the harm of none. And I thought that was really interesting too. It's not like these, you know, when we're putting it out there that these angels are just like, if we're not careful, are going to come down and do bad things. But there's, again, a reason for it, part of the protection. Would you share a little bit about that?
The angels, one of the reasons that I became really, really passionate about them, first off, was just because of how effective this work is. I honestly found angels and archangels, working with them, doing these invocation rituals connected with them, I found that to be by far the most, and by effective, I mean the results were just surpassed anything that I experienced with any other kind of magic. Think of angels and archangels. Archangels are almost like the intelligence that directs the energy. Angels are the energy, whether it's healing energy or the energy of prosperity or the energy of binding and banishing things, whatever it is. Angels are sort of like the just this all-encompassing energy, whereas archangels are the intelligence behind it that directs them. The thing that makes them so effective, and I didn't realize this in the beginning, the thing about magic is you learn more and more as you go along. You'll do practices for years when all of a sudden one day something will click into place and you'll think, why didn't I see this before? Why didn't I understand this before? So for example, when you're doing this practice called the middle pillar, which is very, very similar to the chakra system in Eastern traditions. You're using energy centers that run down the center line of the body, but there's Hebrew mantras that go along with them instead of the Eastern mantras. So, for example, one of them is Ehyeh, which is what the burning bush tells Moses that its name is. Ehyeh means literally I am. So you're saying, like you're vibrating these God names. You're saying, one of them, for example, means I am. One of them means the Lord of creation. One of them means God of knowledge and wisdom. One of them means Lord of the earth. You don't realize when you're vibrating these names that are like names used to describe divinity, names of God, but you are also saying when you're vibrating these names, I am the Lord God of knowledge and wisdom, the Almighty Lord of the earth. You are waking up part of your deepest self, reminding it of what you are, that you're not this small, little I. You're not this ego. There's something else back there. Well, one of the things I realized later is that one of the reasons that doing magic with angels is so effective is because whenever you tell them to do something, whenever you invoke them and give them something to carry out, they're not hearing little I, little ego telling them to do something. They are looking at you as God. They see you as the source of all creation. That's what they perceive as coming through you. So they automatically, that's their job. That's what they're here for. That's their function, is to do what God tells them to do. And that's what they see you as.
It's amazing. I mean, for those of you who haven't yet gotten the book, what Damien does throughout the book, what I thought was really fabulous, was that you went through like the tarot cards, you went through the tree of life, and you connected our astrology, the cards with different angels in a way that I never really saw before, symbolically, to recognize there was just this one other layer that we can start meditating on and connecting with. And I thought that was just so, it was just beautifully well done and instructive. So Damien, there's one other question, and I think that then I think that we can wrap this up. It's so funny, I just caught this out of the corner of my eye. Someone just wrote, this is the only time I have seen Seane as a child student. Yes. And what I hope for everybody, when you're in the presence of someone who knows more than you, you always lean back, take it in with awe and with humility. And that's often how I feel when I'm talking to Damien about magic. It taps into, I've always been a deep student of spiritual practice, regardless of what it is. My heart's been completely open to all forms of relationship with God. And magic is another extension of what already speaks to my soul. And when I'm in the presence of someone who's got a piece of information that is sliding that puzzle of my own soul back together, there's nothing you can do but just lean back, open yourself to it, and ask more questions than you have answers. And so whoever wrote that, yes, you are seeing me as a child student. And I hope it's how we always can be. So the final question is that people are asking, they keep saying, Damien, can you give us a word?
What do you mean by that? A word?
Apparently it's something that you must have said earlier on.
My word that I was given was, this is actually like a really deeply personal thing whenever you do receive a word. But the word that I received was Lil, L-I-L. It is an ancient Sumerian word that means the heavens or heaven. Basically what it symbolizes is that everything that I'm supposed to be teaching about magic ties into the stars, all of it. And that's what angels are. Like I say, they predate all of the Abrahamic religions, going all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, all the way to ancient Sumeria. These are the intelligences that are inherent in the stars. Whenever you start doing these practices, even when you were talking about the angels of the tarot a while ago, even the angels of the tarot can be tied into these intelligences that preside over star systems, planetary energies. And once again, it all goes back to the zodiac. You have the 12 archangels that represent the 12 constellations of the zodiac. You can take each constellation and split it into 3 equal parts of 10 degrees. Like each constellation of the zodiac consists of 30 degrees. Split it into 3 equal parts of 10, and each of those 10 degrees also has an intelligence that presides over it. Well, then you can take those 3 sections of 10 degrees and split those in half into 5 degrees each, and you end up with 72 sections. Those are the angels that go along with the tarot cards. Basically, everything that I have to teach in one way or another ties into astrology, and not astrology in the way that people think of it now. Most people, when we think of astrology in modern times, we think of it almost like the stars or the planets are up there beaming energy down on the world and making things happen down here. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like in ancient Sumer, they realized as above, so below, as within, so without. When you're studying patterns that are taking place in the constellations, they're also taking place inside you. Whenever you're doing this work on an external level, something is also happening to you internally. When you are invoking, say, for example, the 12 archangels of the constellations around you, what you have done, once again, is signaled to your consciousness that you are the center of the universe. You have invoked the intelligences of the entire universe around you. Whenever you start doing that, it causes a rapid unfolding of your consciousness. I always tell people, I'm not here to convert anyone or convince anyone or try to sell this to you or anything else. All I'm doing is showing you what I did that worked and saying, if you want to try it, because like I said, you don't have to believe in it. It works whether you believe in it or not. I'm just trying to make available to everyone what worked for me. And what worked for me was the stars. Lil.
So is it okay if people for this week, they work with Lil? That they take the time. Do you talk about Lil in the book?
I think I do. I'm not 100% positive, just because I've written so much that everything starts to run together for me. So I can't remember what's in what book and what's in the book coming, that's coming out next. It's like everything starts to run together for me, but there will be more stuff on it if it's not there already.
Yeah. So I want to invite people, that's a nice entrance in, like in their meditations. Just work with the sound, the vibration, look it up, read about it, see what lands, what connects, if there's any imagery that comes with it. Get creative, because magic is creative. Maybe draw what Lil is and just see what comes through. Would you recommend that?
Yes, absolutely. I think when you come up with, let your intuition and divinity guide you to create your own rituals, you will end up creating something far more powerful and profound than you will ever find in any book or that anybody else will ever give you, because you're doing something that comes to you directly from the source.
Well, Damien, thank you so much for just being, as always, so open and present and intimate. You share so much with so many, and I can only imagine how exhausting it is to have to be so transparent. And I always want to acknowledge, over the years since I've known you, I've always seen that level of generosity. So thank you once again for showing up in this way.
Thank you. You know, like I said, we wouldn't even be sitting here doing this if we would have never had that first conversation. And even, you know what, it didn't even start with that first conversation. One of the things that I was going to say that I forgot in the beginning was, I even used to, you know, I knew who you were before I ever got out of prison, because I used to get Yoga Journal for years while I was in prison. So you had a profound impact on my life. And you were in my, you know, just my sphere of observation before we even met physically. So thank you for that. And thank everybody else thank you guys for wanting to be part of this, for you know, humoring me and for being interested in this. It is, I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, truly. And hopefully, Damien, you and I were going to do a retreat together here in Canyon, California. Hopefully in the future.
Yes,
we can. You and I are going to get down and do some yoga and magic and show people how those worlds beautifully collide and intersect. So please, just for everyone who's watching or listening, get Angels and Archangels, and
get Revolution of the Soul.
And thank you. And God bless.
Thank you both so much for being with us. Thank you everyone tonight for joining us. And as Sean said, please purchase Damien's book at the green button and Sean's book. You can find both on our website. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your Tuesday to be with us. Thank you, Damien and Sean. It's wonderful to have you. Such an honor. So thank you both, and everyone have a wonderful night.
Thank you guys.